The wine glass caught the light from my dining room chandelier as David raised it high, his face glowing with an expression I'd never seen before. For a moment, I thought he was about to toast me. After all, I'd spent 3 days preparing this Thanksgiving feast, just as I had for the past 28 years since his father died. "I want to make a toast," David announced, his voice carrying that confident tone he'd developed since marrying into the Morrison family, "to the woman who showed me what real parenting looks like." My heart swelled. Finally, after years of thankless sacrifice, my son was... "Carol," he continued, turning to his mother-in-law with a smile that used to be reserved for me, "you're the only real parent I've ever had, not you, Mom." The words hit me like ice water in the face. My fork hovered halfway to my mouth, a piece of turkey growing cold as the gravy congealed on my plate. The dining room, my dining room, with the table I'd bought working double shifts under the chandelier I installed myself because I couldn't afford an electrician, suddenly felt like a courtroom where I'd just been sentenced. "You," David continued, still looking at Carol while gesturing vaguely in my direction, "you were just someone who fed me and drove me places. Carol taught me how to actually live." Time didn't slow. It shattered. I could hear my heartbeat in my ears, feel the pulse in my throat. My peripheral vision blurred until all I could see was my son's face, animated with gratitude for another woman, while dismissing 35 years of my life in a single breath. Even 8-year-old Tommy stopped fidgeting with his mashed potatoes. My grandson's eyes darted between his father and me, sensing the earthquake that had just cracked open our family's foundation. I set my napkin down with the kind of precision you use when you're one wrong movement away from exploding. The soft cotton seemed to whisper against the table as I placed it beside my plate, perfectly parallel to the knife I'd used to carve the turkey at 5 a.m. this morning. "Then perhaps," I said, my voice steady as a surgeon's hand, "Carol should have the honor of your presence for all future holidays." I stood. The scrape of my chair against the hardwood floor rang out like a judge's gavel. Final. Decisive. Irrevocable. "Mom," David started, but I was already walking. Not rushing. I'd learned long ago that dignity doesn't run. Each step was deliberate, measured, the click of my heels counting out the death of who I used to be. "Susan, don't be dramatic," Carol called after me, her voice honeyed with false concern. I paused at the doorway, my hand on the frame of the home I'd kept after Robert died, the home I'd refused to sell even when the mortgage payments meant skipping meals. "I raised you alone after your father died," I said without turning around, "but apparently that counts for nothing." The November air hit me like a slap. I'd left without my coat, but the cold felt appropriate. It matched the ice forming around my heart. My breath came out in visible puffs as I walked down the street I'd pushed David's stroller along 30 years ago, past the elm tree where I taught him to ride a bike, beyond the corner where the school bus used to pick him up while I waved from the window between getting ready for my morning shift. 3 blocks away, I found myself sitting on a park bench covered in frost. The cold seeped through my dress. The burgundy one David used to say made me look classy. My hands were numb, but they weren't shaking. Shock, maybe. Or perhaps after 35 years of bending, I'd finally snapped clean. When did I become the practice parent? The thought rose unbidden, sharp as the winter air. When did I transform from the mother who held him through nightmares to the woman who just fed him and drove him places? A memory flashed. David at 7, the day of Robert's funeral. His small body had been welded to mine, his tears soaking through my black dress as he sobbed, "Mommy, don't leave me too. Promise you'll never leave me." I'd promised. God help me, I'd promised. How did we get from, "Mommy, don't leave me," to this? The answer came in fragments, like slides in an old projector. Me, at 32, suddenly widowed with a 7-year-old who couldn't understand why Daddy wasn't coming home, the life insurance that barely covered the funeral, the second job I'd taken at the urgent care clinic, the night shifts that meant I dozed during the school plays. But I was there, always there, selling my engagement ring to keep our house when the mortgage adjusted, 2 carats that Robert had saved for, reduced to numbers in a bank account that disappeared within months. David never knew. I told him I'd lost it rather than let him carry that weight. Missing my own mother's funeral because David had pneumonia and no one else could stay with him in the hospital. My siblings still didn't speak to me over that choice. But what kind of mother leaves her sick child? The marriage proposals I'd turned down, 3 of them over the years. Good men who could have eased the burden, but David had made it clear. I don't want a new dad. I just need you, Mom. So I'd chosen him. Every time. A jogger passed, shooting me a concerned look. A woman in her 50s, sitting alone on a bench without a coat, probably looked like someone having a breakdown. But I wasn't breaking down. I was breaking free. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out with stiff fingers. David. That was dramatic, Mom. Call me when you're ready to apologize. Apologize? For what? For working myself to the bone? For never missing a parent-teacher conference despite being scheduled for surgery at 6 a.m.? For learning to fix cars and repair roofs and file taxes because there was no one else to do it? I stared at his contact photo, him in his wedding tux, Carol adjusting his boutonniere, while I stood in the background, already being edited out of his life. Without hesitation, I hit delete. If I'm not his real parent, then he's no longer my responsibility. The house was still warm when I returned, the smell of turkey and stuffing hanging in the air like ghosts of the family we pretended to be. They'd left. Of course they had. But the dishes remained on the table. Food congealing on plates, wine glasses with lipstick marks, Carol's lipstick on the glass I'd inherited from my grandmother. My heels clicked across the floor to the wall of photos. David's whole life displayed in frames I'd carefully selected. His first science fair. He'd won 3rd place for a volcano that had taken us 2 weeks to perfect. High school graduation. I'd worked triple shifts to buy him the car he'd wanted. His wedding, where I'd sat in the 3rd row while Carol stood beside him as his second mother during the ceremony. The nursery door stood ajar. I'd been preparing it for months, ever since David announced they were expecting their second child. Hand-sewn curtains in soft yellow, a rocking chair I'd reupholstered myself, a bookshelf already filled with stories I'd planned to read to another grandchild who would call Carol Grandma and me Susan. On the changing table sat a pair of booties I'd finished knitting last week, pale green with tiny pearl buttons. Hours of work, each stitch a little wish for a baby who would grow up believing I was unnecessary. My phone buzzed again, this time a text from my sister-in-law, Linda. David says you had some kind of episode at dinner. Are you feeling all right? Maybe you should see someone. Episode. They were already rewriting history, painting me as unstable rather than insulted. By tomorrow, the story would be that I'd had a breakdown, not that my son had publicly dismissed my entire existence. I walked to my bedroom, past the bathroom where I'd taught David to brush his teeth, past the hall closet where his baby clothes still sat in a box marked for grandchildren, and sat on my bed. The same bed where I'd cried myself to sleep for months after Robert died, muffling my sobs so David wouldn't hear and worry. On my nightstand sat a photo from last Mother's Day. David, his wife Emma, Tommy, and Carol at a restaurant. I'd taken the photo because no one had thought to include me in it. David had posted it on Facebook with the caption, "Blessed to have such an amazing mom in my life," under Carol's smiling face. I hadn't said anything then, just liked the post and moved on, swallowing the hurt like I'd swallowed so many others. But tonight was different. Tonight, he'd said it out loud, in my own home, at my own table. If I wasn't his real parent, if Carol had done all the actual parenting, then it was time to make that official. Time to stop pretending that sacrifice meant anything to someone who'd rewritten our history to make himself more comfortable. I reached for my laptop and opened my banking app. $850,000 in savings. A lifetime of scrimping, saving, working holidays and weekends. Every penny earmarked for David, for Tommy's college, for helping with the new baby. But why save for children who didn't consider me family? Tomorrow, I'd call my lawyer. Tonight, I'd sit with the truth that my son had handed me over turkey and stuffing. I'd spent 35 years raising someone who'd decided I'd never been his mother at all. The booties sat on my dresser now, tiny and perfect and useless. I picked them up, ran my thumb over the pearl buttons, then placed them in my jewelry box next to the space where my engagement ring used to be. If David wanted Carol to be his only parent, then he was about to learn exactly what that meant.
I didn't sleep that night. How could I? Every time I closed my eyes, I saw David's face. Not the cruel stranger from dinner, but my little boy, with gap teeth and scraped knees, promising he'd take care of me when he grew up. When I'm big, Mommy, I'll buy you a mansion and you'll never have to work again. By 5 a.m., I gave up pretending. I made coffee in the same pot I'd used since David was in middle school, the one he'd bought me with his lawn mowing money from Mother's Day. My hands shook as I poured, but not from caffeine, from rage. Pure crystallized rage that had been fermenting for years, waiting for last night's words to uncork it. At 8 a.m. sharp, I sat in the waiting room of Hartley & Associates, my funeral dress replaced with my sharpest pantsuit, the one I wore when I had to fire someone or fight for a patient's life. Battle armor. Susan, James Hartley emerged, his face creasing with concern. I wasn't expecting you. Is everything all right? I need to change my will, I said, standing with my folder of documents. Today. His eyebrows rose, but he'd been my attorney for 20 years. He knew better than to question the steel in my voice. In his office, I spread out my financial statements like a general planning siege. Everything. I want to change everything. Your current will leaves the bulk of your estate to David, James said carefully, reviewing the documents. The house, your savings, your retirement accounts. $850,000 in savings, a house worth $425,000, my retirement accounts, life insurance, everything I've bled for since Robert died. My voice cracked on my husband's name, but I pushed through. I want David removed completely. James set down his pen. Susan, I have to ask, are you sure? This is a significant decision. Maybe you should take some time. 28 years. I've had 28 years of time, 28 years of choosing him over myself. Last night, he told a room full of people that his mother-in-law is his only real parent, that I just fed him and drove him places. The words tasted like poison coming out. James winced. So yes, I continued, hands flat on his desk, I'm sure. If Carol Morrison is his only real parent, then she can provide his inheritance too. What would you like to do with the assets? I'd thought about this all night, between replaying David's words and cataloging every sacrifice he'd forgotten. I want to create a scholarship, the Second Chance Scholarship for single mothers pursuing nursing degrees. My voice steadied as the vision crystallized. Women who are doing what I did, raising children alone, working themselves to death, trying to better themselves while the world tells them they're not enough. James nodded slowly, making notes. That's beautiful, Susan. And the house? Sold. Proceeds to the scholarship fund. I thought of the kitchen where I had taught David to cook, the backyard where we'd buried 3 goldfish with full funeral ceremonies. It's just walls now. Walls that witnessed a lie. As James drafted the paperwork, his assistant brought tea. My hands had stopped shaking. Each signature felt like shedding skin, painful but necessary. There's one more thing, I said as we finished. I want this retroactive to yesterday, before Thanksgiving dinner.
I want it clear that this decision was made with complete clarity, not in emotional distress. James understood. We'd make it bulletproof against any claims of mental incapacity or undue influence. I was walking to my car when my phone rang. Martha's name flashed on the screen. My oldest friend, fellow ER nurse, keeper of secrets. Susan Miller, what the hell happened last night? Linda's been calling everyone saying you had some kind of breakdown? Meet me at Coleman's. I'll explain everything. At the diner where we'd shared 20 years of coffee and crisis, Martha listened to the whole story. Her face cycled through disbelief, anger, and finally grim recognition. "Oh, honey," she said when I finished. "This isn't the first time, is it?" I stared at my coffee, seeing patterns in the cream I'd been too afraid to acknowledge. "What do you mean?" "David's wedding," Martha said gently. "You paid for everything, but you sat in the third row while Carol sat with immediate family. The baby shower, where everyone called Carol Grandma but called you Susan. Mother's Day 2 years ago, when David posted that tribute to Carol on Facebook. Stop." The word came out sharp. Each memory was a needle under my skin. "I'm not trying to hurt you." Martha reached for my hand. "But sweetie, he's been erasing you slowly, testing boundaries. Last night wasn't the beginning. It was just him finally saying the quiet part out loud."
My phone buzzed. Family group chat. David had posted. "Hi, everyone. I wanted to address what happened at dinner. Mom had an unexpected emotional episode and left abruptly. We're concerned about her mental state and think she might be showing signs of confusion. Please be patient with her during this difficult time." Confusion? Episode? Mental state? "That bastard," Martha breathed, reading over my shoulder. My fingers flew across the screen before I could think better of it. "The only confusion here is how I raised such an ungrateful son. My mental state is perfectly clear, which is why I met with my attorney this morning. But don't worry about my difficult time. I'm handling it just fine. Send." The typing indicators appeared immediately, multiple people starting and stopping responses. Then my phone rang. David. "Don't answer," Martha warned. But I did. I needed to hear his voice, to confirm that the stranger from last night hadn't been a nightmare. "Mom, what the hell was that message? You're embarrassing yourself." "Am I? More embarrassing than being told I'm not a real parent at my own dinner table?" "You're twisting my words. Carol is the only real parent I've ever had, not you, Mom." I quoted him perfectly. "Which word did I twist?" A pause, then Carol's voice, syrupy sweet. "Susan, this is Carol. We're on speaker. In healthy families, people don't storm out of dinners." The audacity knocked the breath from me. This woman who'd married into money, who'd never worked a day in her life, who'd waltzed into my son's life when the hard work was done, she was lecturing me about healthy families? In healthy families, sons don't publicly disown their mothers. But you wouldn't know about that, would you, Carol? You only became a mother after someone else did the heavy lifting. "Now that's uncalled for," David started. "Uncalled for?" My voice rose, and Martha grabbed my arm in warning, but I was done being quiet. "Let me tell you what's uncalled for. $47,000 in loans you never repaid. $18,000 a year for Tommy's private school that I pay because you can't afford it on your tech salary. The $50,000 down payment on your house that you called a temporary help." Silence. Even the diner seemed to hold its breath. "But Carol," I continued, "Carol contributes cookies and advice, and apparently that makes her the real parent." "Mom, I've removed you from my will, David." The words fell like dominoes. "Every penny, the house, the life insurance, everything. If Carol's your only real parent, then she can provide your inheritance too." "You can't be serious." His voice cracked, the first real emotion I'd heard from him. "Mom, that's insane. You can't just—" "I can and I have. I'm done being your ATM with amnesia." Mom, please. I hung up. Martha stared at me, eyes wide. Susan. Holy shit. I know. My hands were trembling again, but this time with something that felt like power. I know. $850,000 plus the house. And you're really giving it all away? I thought of the single mothers I'd worked beside over the years. Women who came to work with bruises hidden under scrubs, who counted pennies for gas, who missed their own children's bedtimes to care for strangers. Women like I'd been. I'm not giving it away, I said. I'm giving it purpose, which is more than David ever did. The text started immediately. David, his wife Emma, Linda, cousins I hadn't heard from in years, all variations of the same theme. I'd lost my mind, I needed help, this wasn't like me. But that was the problem, wasn't it? This was exactly like me. I'd spent 28 years giving everything and asking for nothing. The only difference was that now I was done. That evening, I sat at my kitchen table with a leather journal Martha had insisted I buy. Document everything, she'd said, before they rewrite history completely. So I wrote every sacrifice, every sleepless night, every missed opportunity, every time I'd chosen David over myself. The promotion I'd turned down because it meant traveling. The man I'd stopped seeing because David didn't like him. The cruise I'd canceled to pay for his car repairs. But I also wrote about what Carol had done, which, when listed out, looked pathetically thin. Hosted tea parties, gave unsolicited marriage advice, bought expensive Christmas gifts with her husband's money, taught Emma to play tennis at the country club, posted inspirational quotes on Facebook. This was the woman who'd replaced me. My phone rang again. Unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. Susan, this is James Morrison, Carol's husband. I nearly dropped the phone. In 15 years, the man had spoken maybe 50 words to me.
James, this is unexpected. I'm calling. He paused, and I heard ice clinking in a glass. I'm calling to apologize. What David said last night was inexcusable. Then why didn't you say something? Because I'm a coward, he said simply, and because Carol has a way of making her version of reality seem inevitable. But I remember what you looked like at David's high school graduation, exhausted but proud. I remember you at their wedding, paying for everything while pretending your dress wasn't from Goodwill. My throat tightened. I hadn't known anyone had noticed the dress. I should have spoken up. Last night. Years ago. I'm sorry. Why are you telling me this now? Because David called asking me to talk sense into you about the will. And I realized you're the only one in this whole mess who's actually making sense. After he hung up, I sat in the darkness of my kitchen, wondering how many people had seen the truth, but stayed silent. How many had watched David erase me, year by year, and said nothing because it wasn't their business. But it was my business, and I was finally taking care of it. Part 3. The Transformation. The next morning, I woke with a hangover of clarity, not from wine, I hadn't touched a drop, but from the intoxicating realization that I could simply stop. Stop paying, stop giving, stop shrinking myself to fit into the margins of my son's life. My first call was to Preston Academy. Mrs. Miller, calling about Tommy's spring semester tuition? The administrator's voice chirped with familiar warmth. After all, my checks never bounced. Actually, I'm calling to inform you that I'll no longer be paying Tommy's tuition. Silence. Then, carefully, I'm sorry? The payment is due next week. Then his parents should probably figure that out. I kept my voice pleasant, professional, the same tone I used when explaining to families that visiting hours were over. Please update your records to reflect that all future correspondence should go to David and Emma Miller. But you've been paying for 3 years. And now I'm not. Have a lovely day.
I hung up before she could sputter more protests. One down.
Then the house. My beautiful, exhausting house. Every room held a ghost, teaching David to walk in the living room, helping with homework at the kitchen table, nursing him through chicken pox in the guest room. But ghosts don't pay mortgages, and I was done living in a museum of unappreciated sacrifices. I was scheduling a realtor appointment when the doorbell rang. Through the peephole, I saw David's car in the driveway. He stood on my porch, the same porch where he'd carved pumpkins and waited for prom dates, looking like a stranger in an expensive suit. When had he started dressing like Carol's people? "We need to talk," he said when I opened the door. "No, we don't." I didn't move aside. "Mom, please, can I just come in? It's my childhood home." "It's my house," I corrected, "paid for with my blood, sweat, and overtime. You're not welcome here anymore." His face flushed. "You're being ridiculous over one comment." One comment. My laugh came out sharp as winter air. "David, you've been erasing me for years. I just finally decided to help you finish the job." "That's not— Mom, you know I love you." "Do I?" I stepped onto the porch, closing the door behind me. "Because love doesn't usually come with public humiliation and gaslighting." "Gaslighting? Mom, you literally walked out of Thanksgiving dinner after you announced I wasn't your real parent? But sure, make this about my reaction, not your cruelty." He ran his hands through his hair, a gesture I'd seen 1,000 times, from toddler tantrums to teenage heartbreaks, but I felt nothing. The maternal pull that had governed my life for 35 years had snapped like an overstretched rubber band. "Look," his voice shifted to negotiation mode. "What do you want? An apology? Fine. I'm sorry. I shouldn't have said it that way." "That way?" I laughed again. "Which way should you have said it, David? What's the polite way to tell your mother she's worthless?" "I never said worthless. Just someone who fed me and drove me places." Your words, in front of my grandson, in my own home. The manipulation was so transparent it insulted my intelligence. "Then tell him the truth. His father decided I'm not really family." "Mom." "Susan," I corrected. "If I'm not your mom, then I'm just Susan to you." His face went pale. "You can't be serious." "I've never been more serious in my life." I turned to go inside, then paused. "Oh, and you should probably talk to Preston Academy, something about next semester's tuition." "What did you do?" "I stopped enabling your fiction. If Carol's your real parent, then she can write the checks." The panic in his eyes was beautiful. "Mom, Susan, whoever, you can't just cut off Tommy's education." "I'm not. I'm giving his parents the opportunity to parent." "That's $18,000. Plus the health insurance you'll need to figure out, and the car insurance I've been paying, and this is insane," he was shouting now. "You're destroying your grandson's future because your feelings got hurt?" I stepped closer, my voice dropping to the tone I used in the ER when someone needed to hear hard truths. "I'm not destroying anything. I'm done building. There's a difference." A car pulled up, Emma in her BMW that I'd co-signed for. She emerged looking harried, Tommy in the back seat playing on an iPad I'd bought him. "David? What's— Susan, thank God. We need to talk about this rationally." "No." The word felt like freedom. "We don't need to do anything. You need to figure out how to pay for your son's school. I need to finish packing." "Packing?" Emma's voice pitched high. "What do you mean packing?" "I'm selling the house. Downsizing. Simplifying. Moving on." "You can't sell this house," David exploded. "This is our family home." "Was," I corrected. "It was our family home, when we were a family. Now it's just real estate." Tommy had gotten out of the car, approaching cautiously. "Grandma Susan, are you mad at us?" My heart cracked, but didn't break. I knelt to his level. "No, sweetheart, I'm not mad at you. But sometimes grown-ups make choices, and we all have to live with them. Dad said you're sick. In your brain?" The crack widened.
I looked up at David, who at least had the grace to look ashamed. My brain is fine, Tommy. Your dad is confused about the difference between sick and tired. Can I still come visit you? If your parents allow it, you're always welcome. That's the thing, Emma interjected, pulling Tommy back. We're not comfortable with unsupervised visits right now, given your state. My state. I stood slowly, brushing off my knees. And I guess that's that. I headed for my door. You're choosing this, David called after me. You're the one breaking our family. I turned one last time. No, David, I'm choosing me. For the first time in 28 years, I'm choosing me. And it terrifies you because you know what that means. You'll actually have to pay for your own life. Inside, I locked the door and listened to them argue in my driveway. Emma's shrill voice about private school, David's panic about health insurance, Tommy's confused questions. The symphony of consequences. My phone buzzed. Martha? You okay? Heard David's car was at your place. Better than okay. I think I'm free. That evening, I sat in what would soon be someone else's living room. Boxes already started, donations sorted. The booties I'd knitted still sat on the coffee table. Tiny monuments to misplaced hope. A knock interrupted my packing. Not David's demanding pound or Emma's tentative tap. Soft but confident. I opened to find 3 women from my quilting circle, Betty, Joan, and Rose. They held casseroles and wine. Martha called us, Betty said simply. Said you might need some company. I'm fine, I started. Bullshit, Joan interrupted. No one's fine after cutting off their only child, but sometimes necessary isn't the same as fine. They swept in, setting up dinner, pouring wine, settling around me like a protective circle. And suddenly, I was crying. Not delicate tears, but ugly, body-shaking sobs that had been building for years. Let it out, Rose murmured, rubbing my back. God knows you've held it in long enough. I gave him everything, I gasped between sobs. Everything. And he gave me to Carol, like I was a used car he was trading in. Men do that sometimes, Betty said quietly. Trade up when they think they've found something shinier. My son did it with his father, decided his stepfather was his real dad after Frank paid for college. Broke his father's heart. What did you do? I asked. Watched my husband die inside a little more each day until cancer finished the job. Her voice was steady, but her eyes were wet. Don't be me, Susan. Don't wait for someone else to validate your worth.
We talked until midnight. Joan shared how her daughter had chosen her wealthy in-laws over her. Rose told us about the son who only called when he needed money. Betty poured more wine and declared us the Erased Mothers Club. We need a better name, I laughed, feeling lighter than I had in years. The Survivors, Rose suggested. The Reclaimers, Joan countered. The Free Women, I said quietly. They all raised their glasses. The next week blurred with purpose. House on the market, price to sell fast. Storage unit rented for things I couldn't part with yet. Real estate agent showing the property while I sat in my favorite coffee shop, planning a life that didn't revolve around David's needs. The group chat exploded daily. Family members taking sides, mostly David's. My sister-in-law Linda was the worst. Susan, this is so unlike you. Have you considered therapy? Menopause can cause irrational behavior. I responded once, what's irrational about expecting respect? And I went through menopause 5 years ago, but nice try. Then I muted them all. But the universe has a sense of humor. Tuesday morning, David showed up at my work. The ER was busy, flu season always was, and I was updating charts when I heard the commotion. I need to see Susan Miller. She's my mother. It's an emergency. I sighed, saved my work, and walked to the waiting room. David stood at the registration desk, designer clothes wrinkled, hair disheveled. He looked like he'd slept in his car. What's the emergency? I asked calmly. He spun around. Mom, thank God, we need to talk.
Are you injured? Experiencing chest pain? Difficulty breathing? What? No. Then it's not an emergency. I turned to the registration clerk. If he's not seeking medical attention, please ask him to leave. You can't just dismiss me, he voiced Rose, drawing stares from actual patients. I'm your son. No, I said clearly, aware of my colleagues watching. According to you, you're Carol's son. I'm just someone who fed you and drove you places, and my shift feeding you ended on Thanksgiving. How can you be so cold? He was nearly shouting now. How can you just cut off your own grandson?
I stepped closer, lowering my voice. I didn't cut off anyone. I stopped bankrolling your lifestyle. If that means Tommy suffers, then maybe you should ask yourself what kind of father prioritizes his pride over his son's education. Security arrived. George, who'd worked here almost as long as I had. He looked between us, uncertain. It's okay, George, I said. Mr. Miller was just leaving. This isn't over, David hissed as George gently guided him toward the exit. You're going to regret this when you're old and alone. I'd rather be alone than surrounded by people who only value my checkbook, I called after him. The waiting room burst into spontaneous applause. An elderly woman in the corner shouted, "Good for you, honey." My supervisor, Patricia, appeared at my elbow. You okay? Actually, yes, I really am. She studied me for a moment, then smiled. Good. I've been watching that boy take advantage of you for years. About time you cut him off. You saw it? Everyone saw it, Susan. We just didn't know how to tell you. That evening, I found a note on my car. Not David's angry scrawl, but Tommy's careful printing. Dear Grandma Susan, I miss you. Mom says we can't see you because you're sick, but you looked okay at the hospital. Dad was really mad. Are you mad at me? Love, Tommy. My hand shook as I read it. This was the cruelty I couldn't forgive. Using an 8-year-old as a weapon, letting him think his grandmother was sick rather than telling him the truth. I saved the note. Evidence for the journal, yes, but also a reminder. This was why I had to stay strong, not just for me, but to show Tommy that love shouldn't come with price tags and conditions. When I got home, to my soon-to-be former home, Carol's Mercedes sat in my driveway. She emerged like royalty, all pearls and perfect hair, designer purse worth more than I made in a month. Susan, we need to have a woman-to-woman chat. No, we don't. I walked past her to my door. I understand you're hurt. Hurt? You think this is about hurt feelings? She actually looked surprised. Well, yes, David said something thoughtless, and you're lashing out. Carol, I'm not hurt. I'm awake. There's a difference. I don't understand why you're being so difficult. Families forgive. Are we family? Because according to your son-in-law, you're Tommy's only real grandparent, so what does that make us? She flushed. I never asked David to say that. But you didn't correct him either. You sat at my table, eating my food, accepting praise for being the real parent while I was dismissed as the help. I thought you'd appreciate all I've done for David. All you've done? I laughed, but it sounded like breaking glass. You taught him to play golf. I taught him to walk. You bought him cufflinks. I bought him food when we had nothing. You gave him connections. I gave him life. But sure, Carol, tell me more about all you've done. She straightened, the mask of concern dropping. You know, Susan, this bitter attitude is probably why David gravitates toward me. I provide a positive, nurturing environment. You provide money and the illusion that life is easy because you've never had to work for anything. You're a parasite wrapped in Chanel, and you've taught my son to be the same. Her mouth opened and closed like a fish. She'd probably never been spoken to like that in her life. Get off my property, I said quietly, and tell David that if he wants to continue this, he can go through my lawyer. She left in a cloud of expensive perfume and indignation. I went inside and poured myself a glass of wine.
The good stuff I'd been saving for a special occasion. This seemed special enough. The beginning of my life as just Susan. Not David's mother, not anyone's safety net, just Susan. And for the first time in 28 years, that felt like enough.
6 months later, I stood in my Roman apartment, espresso in hand, watching the sunrise paint the ancient city gold. The Susan who'd served others until she disappeared would have never imagined this life. But the Susan who'd finally chosen herself, she was living it. My phone buzzed. David's number. The third new one he'd tried. I'd blocked them all, but he kept finding ways. This time, a text got through. Mom, I'm sorry. I see it now. Carol left when the money ran out. Emma took Tommy and moved back with her parents. I lost my job trying to maintain the lifestyle. Please, I need you. I read it twice, waiting for the familiar tug of maternal duty. Instead, I felt only a distant sadness, not for what I'd lost, but for what had never really existed. Apologies born from consequences aren't apologies. They're just manipulation wearing a different mask. I deleted the text and blocked this number too. My laptop chimed with an email from the Scholarship Foundation. 3 more single mothers had graduated nursing school this semester. One wrote, "You saved us, Miss Miller, not just financially, but by showing us we matter." That was worth more than a son who only remembered my value when his ATM closed. "Susan," my neighbor Francesca called from the courtyard, "are you coming to market?" 5 minutes, I called back in Italian I'd never thought I could learn. As I gathered my basket, my phone rang. Martha. "How's Rome treating you?" "I matter," I said simply. "How's the support group?" 23 members now. Betty wants to start a newsletter, the Reclaimers Report. We laughed, but it was tinged with understanding. We were women who'd been erased by those we'd sacrificed everything for, but we'd refused to disappear. Any word from David? He found another number. Apparently, Carol abandoned ship when the money dried up. Shocking. A woman who valued wealth over family turned out to be shallow. Who could have predicted? He says he's sorry, says he sees it now. And nothing. You can't apologize for a forest fire after you've burned everything down, then expect the trees to grow back overnight. That's my girl. Speaking of growth, how's the art class?
I glanced at my easel, where a half-finished painting of the Colosseum waited. Terrible, but I'm learning that being bad at something new is better than being good at something that kills you slowly. After we hung up, I walked to the market, greeting vendors who now knew my name. Not as someone's mother or wife, but as Susan, who liked her tomatoes perfectly ripe and always bought too many flowers. My instructor, Marco, waved from his stall. "Bella Susan, you look happy today." I am happy, I realized as I said it. Completely, selfishly, wonderfully happy. Because here's what they don't tell you about being erased. Sometimes it's not a tragedy. Sometimes it's permission to rewrite yourself completely. I thought about Tommy sometimes, wondered if he'd grow up believing the fiction his parents created. But I'd left truth in my wake. The scholarship, the women I'd helped, the example that love shouldn't require you to shrink yourself until you disappear. That evening, I sat on my terrace with wine that cost less than what I used to spend on David's weekly coffee habit, but tasted like freedom. My phone sat silent. No demands, no guilt, no one calling to remind me that my worth lay only in what I could provide. Below, Rome hummed with life, ancient and eternal, proof that some things endure even after empires fall. I built my own small empire on sacrifice and service, only to watch it crumble at a dinner table. But maybe that's the secret. Sometimes things need to fall apart completely before you realize you were the only one holding them together. And once you stop, once you step back and let it all crash, you discover the most beautiful truth. You're still standing. And that's enough.
No, that's everything.